Hey, physiology students. Okay, this Zoom lecture is going to be part of Chapter 4, Part 2, Central Nervous System Physiology. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go through the PowerPoint. Okay. All right, so here is slide 1. Okay, so what we're going to cover in this lecture, well, this is going to be broken up into 3 separate lectures just to shear down the size of the file on YouTube, but we're going to talk about the 6 major brain regions and their primary function. And then on the next lecture, we'll talk about the blood supply to the brain and the blood-brain barrier, and most importantly for future nurses, common brain injuries that you're going to see on a regular basis. And then we'll talk about some brain imaging techniques that are routinely used in hospitals. So let's go ahead and start with anatomy review. I have to assume that you've had this, and certainly hope you know that the central nervous system is basically the brain and the spinal cord, okay? So what you see right here is a plastinated version of a human body where they've basically injected a latex system to preserve the nervous structure, the nerves, and then they dissolved away all other tissue. So it just goes to show you that the brain is pretty complex and the spinal cord as well. Now, the peripheral nervous system is all other nervous tissue that's outside of the spinal cord. So if we look at this figure over here, that is basically anything outside the spinal cord. All right, so that's probably all the nerves that you learned in anatomy. Okay, let's continue on. More review, yay. And if you go to page 58 to 59 in your wiki text, you can read this material. So basically, let's start at the top. So the cerebrum is this entire region right here. It's the largest, most superior part of the brain. It's divided into different lobes, which you've learned and we'll cover here shortly. And under that is going to be the diencephalon here in yellow, and that includes the thalamus right here. Below the thalamus is called the hypothalamus, and then coming off the thalamus is the optic chiasm and the pituitary gland. Next, located midway in the brain is the midbrain. Next, the pons, all right, here. I like to think of the pons as the pregnant belly of the brainstem because it sticks out to the anterior here. Now, right below the pons is the medulla. And we've talked about the medulla's functions a lot this semester. And then lastly, the back part right here is the cerebellum. Now, of all these 6 regions, 3 of them are called the brainstem, and the brainstem contains all the autonomic functions that is basically your life support system. So things controlling your heart and your respiratory rate and other autonomic functions that you have no voluntary control of. And so those regions include the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. And of all of these, I think the medulla is the most important one and has the most diverse job. So let's continue on. We're going to look at the different brain regions, not regions, the lobes of the cerebrum. And you can see 4 of them here. The 5th one's hidden, but right here in yellow is the frontal lobe. And this part, this strip of the frontal lobe that's got the green hash marks right here, that is called the motor cortex. That is your voluntary motor control of your entire body. Okay. So in the left hemisphere, this motor cortex controls the right side of your body, and then on the the right hemisphere of this motor cortex is going to control your left hemisphere of your body. Okay, now another thing right here on the left frontal lobe only is the motor speech area known as the Brocas area. So if someone has brain damage in this region of their frontal lobe, it's very likely they'll get a speech deficit of some sort. If they had brain damage somewhere along this motor cortex, they're probably going to show a motor deficit of some sort. Okay, so moving to the posterior in the blue region, the parietal lobe, all right, and the hash marks of this strip of the parietal lobe is known as the sensory cortex, and it receives all the sensory information from your body on temperature, touch, pressure, vibration, things like that, all right? Now, This area right here that spans the temporal lobe and the parietal lobe, and although it doesn't show it in this image, it also includes some of the occipital lobe. This is, they say it's called the general interpretive area. No one calls it that. It's the Wernicke's area, and we'll talk about what that does soon. Okay, down below in pink, the temporal lobe. Now, this is the lobe that would be located inside your skull where your ear is, and we're going to talk about its functions as well. And back here is the occipital lobe. Now, if I were to peel apart and pry apart the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe and kind of look in between those lobes, you'll find the insular lobe down in there. So let's talk about the division of labor in these lobes. So the frontal lobe, again, right here, okay, in yellow. The motor cortex, where the green hash marks are, is also known as the precentral gyrus. And the reason it's called that is the central sulcus separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe, this black line. And since the motor cortex is located in front of that sulcus, it's called the precentral gyrus. Pre being before, central for central sulcus. Now, that is motor control of your body. Now, the red hash mark area is the Broca's motor speech area. Now, what most anatomy textbooks won't show you is just below that Broca's area, kind of in this area right here, is the prefrontal cortex. This is a very complex area. Your sense of self, you knowing you're different from some other person, your personality, your primal emotions, all sorts of things, higher order thinking is really located in this prefrontal cortex. All right, and we'll talk more about that later. Now, the parietal lobe, that has the sensory cortex or the postcentral gyrus. Post because it's behind, and central for the central sulcus. So it's the blue striped mark right here. Now, that is going to handle all of your sensory interpretation. And notice it has part of the Wernicke's area. Now, the Wernicke's area is your language center, and it works in conjunction with the Broca's area. But the Wernicke's area is for understanding both the written and spoken word. So if someone has damage to their left hemisphere of their brain and it affects the Broca's area, they'll have a speaking problem. If it affects the Wernicke's area, they're going to have a problem understanding language. The next lobe is the temporal lobe. Now, the temporal lobe, showing right here, it says auditory area. That's your auditory cortex. That's for perceiving sound. It also has, and not shown here, is an olfactory cortex, and that is for smell. All right. Okay. So I'm going to get my laser pointer if I can. All right. So moving on, the occipital lobe's next. The occipital lobe back here has a visual cortex for perceiving vision, basically interpreting it. And it also has part of the Wernicke's area. Lastly, the insular lobe, the hidden lobe, that has a gustatory cortex, and that's for perception of taste. Okay, on this next slide, you will not need to memorize this figure. It's just to give you an idea of the map of motor control of your body versus sensory perception in your body. So here's our brain, and the black line is the central sulcus. Before that line is the precentral gyrus. That's your motor cortex of the frontal lobe. Now, starting with the deep longitudinal fissure, if you work your way up, you have motor control in this part of the cortex for your foot, leg, pelvis. And as you're moving over the top, your torso or trunk, your arms, your hands, your face, and then swallowing and chewing and things like that. So that's for motor control over those regions of your body. Now, matching with the postcentral gyrus and the parietal lobe, remember this is sensory perception for different parts of your body. If you start in the longitudinal fissure again, it kind of matches the motor cortex map, but it is sensory perception or feeling. So if you start deep in the fissure, it's genitals, foot, leg, and as you move over the top, trunk, neck, arm, hand, and then as you're moving laterally, your face and tongue and mouth. Okay, so it's just an idea of the map of your body for motor control versus feeling. So let's talk a little bit about Broca's area. So, like I mentioned before, it's in the left lobe of the frontal lobe, and it is your motor speech area. So, it's going to be controlling muscles like your tongue and your voice box, and for moving your lips and everything like that to get the words out and form them. The Wernicke's area is about understanding language. Okay, so that's what these two areas function in. Now, a very common problem is people who suffer a brain injury or stroke might have damage to these areas, and they might have a problem speaking after a stroke or even understanding language. And then some people could just be born with these problems, and that is where people who do speech pathology and speech therapy can help teach these people how to communicate again. So let's talk about disorders in speech. Aphasias are a communication disorder, and it could either be a Broca's aphasia if that part of the brain is damaged, or it could be a Wernicke's aphasia. Now, Broca's aphasia is called non-fluent aphasia. Non-fluent means they can't get the words out smoothly. They're having difficulty. Think stuttering. These people understand language, so don't treat them like they're idiots, but they're just having a hard time getting the words out, and it's got to be very frustrating. So they understand language fine. They understand what you're saying. They know what they want to say, but they have a hard time getting those words out. So what I'm going to do is I am going to show a video here. Oops, go back to uh, pen. Let's see, change it to a pointer. Won't let me. Okay, let's see if I can do it by touching it. No, it won't. Okay, having a little difficulty with my. I'm going to end the show, keep the ink. I don't know why it won't let me do it, but it'll let me do it now. Okay, so we're going to now go to that link. Here we go. So here's someone with Broca's aphasia.
So how are you doing today, Kim? Okay. Okay. Are you having pain anywhere? No. No. You feel pretty good in general? Yes. You can understand what I'm saying to you, right? Yes. Okay. Can you close your eyes for me? Perfect. Now tell me your name. Because I'm bad. No, I'm Tell me what city we're in right now. This is Richmond. Can you say Richmond? Yes, Richmond. Richmond. Say Richmond. Richmond. Okay. Can you say 1, 2, 3? 1, 2, 3. Okay. That's very good. Can you name the weeks of the days of the week for me? Yes. Name the days of the week. I'm bad. I'm Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Okay, that's good.
Okay, so I think you get the idea. All right. Okay, so that's Broca's aphasia. Next would be Wernicke's aphasia. Now that's called fluent aphasia because the words come flying out, but they don't make any sense. Okay, it's been called word salad because the words are put together haphazardly without any meaning. It might have meaning to the person who's speaking, but the person who's listening, you don't understand what they're saying. Okay, so it comes out fluidly, but it doesn't make any sense. So here's a YouTube video on Wernicke's aphasia.
Hi, Byron. How are you?
I'm happy. Are you pretty? You look good.
Sorry.
What are you doing today?
We stayed with the water over here at the moment. Talk with the people over them over there. They're diving for them at the moment. They'll save in the moment. He'll have water very soon for him. With luck for him.
So we're on a cruise and we're about to
We
get to
will
Juneau.
store it right here and they'll save their hands right there for them.
And what were we just doing with the iPad?
At the moment, they don't show a darn thing.
The iPad that we were doing. Like here?
I might change for me and change hands for me. With Happy, I would talk with Donna sometimes. We're out with them. Other people are working with them. I'm very happy with them.
Good.
This girl was fairly good and happy. And I play golf and hit other trees. We play out with the hands. We save a lot of hands on hold for people from us. Other hands. I don't know what you get, but I talk with a lot of hands for you. Sometimes. I talk of any more to say it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So I think you get the idea that he seemed to know what he wanted to say, kind of had an idea, but the words just came out and make no sense. You might be able to piece together a little bit about what he means, but it's very hard to understand him. Okay, so let's go back to our PowerPoint. So I think those best show what aphasias are. Now, I've got a link here for FMU speech pathology program because it's another way to work with patients. It pays really well. It's a master's degree, which is a 2-year program. And when I looked at the U.S. Occupational Outlook Handbook for Health Careers, speech pathology was a growing market, a growing career, and salaries start around $75,000 to $79,000 a year. So that's a pretty good job too. So if nursing isn't your bag, this might be another option. So let's move on. Okay. Okay, so sleep. It's really controlled in your cerebrum. And there's 2 categories. There is category 1 or non-REM sleep. That's where you spend about 80% of your sleep. And then there is deep sleep or rapid eye movement, REM. That's stage 5, and you only spend about 20% of your sleep in that. And what happens through the night is you cycle through. You'll go through non-REM and then go into deep sleep, REM sleep, and then go back through non-REM and keep cycling through the night. Now, what happens during REM sleep is that your limbic or emotional brain remains active. So if you've ever had a dream where you've laughed or cried or were upset, those emotions are all there and active in your limbic part of your brain. However, in your body, in order to protect you during deep sleep, you'll have GABA, which is a neurotransmitter we covered in the last chapter, that inhibits your brain awareness of unimportant stimuli, things that aren't a threat to your life. So if you've gotten used to white noise, like a TV being on, or Saturday morning, someone running a lawnmower, and you've tuned that out and you can sleep despite that, that's unimportant stimuli. So your brain relaxes and goes into sleep because of GABA. Now, also, GABA will inhibit your skeletal muscle movement when you're in deep sleep. Okay, this is so you don't get up when you're unconscious and hurt yourself, because you could really get hurt. Children, often when they're young, this GABA system is not fully engaged yet, and they will sleepwalk. Okay, that's not supposed to happen. They should grow out of it. Now, and if an adult develops sleepwalking, that indicates a problem. Okay, all right. Now, so sometimes when you're going into deep sleep, GABA doesn't quite inhibit your skeletal muscles quickly. It takes time, it takes a process. And so we've probably all experienced it, a sleep twitch or a jerk or a myoclonus, like this sleeping cat is showing right here. That twitching means GABA hasn't completely inhibited its skeletal muscles. And so that happens when you're going from non-REM to deep REM, where you'll have that little muscle jerk. Okay, those are completely normal. Now, when you're in deep sleep, if your brain senses important stimuli, it will rouse you through the reticular activating system. And we'll talk about that later. Okay, we're still in the cerebrum talking about its functions. So what we've got here is a section through the brain where they've cut through this way. And you see deep inside the brain, in the cerebrum, you see these pigmented clusters of nuclei. These are important for fine motor control. Now, the colostrum is for taking visual information and incorporating that into your motor movements. So you use visual feedback of your horizon to maintain your balance. And your body can tell by your horizon tilting if your body's shifting. And this will help send information to posture muscles to correct it so you balance. Okay. Now, if you've ever balanced on one foot with your eyes open, you can do it with your hands out to the side, right? Go ahead while you're doing that balancing on one foot, close your eyes and then try and maintain balance. And you'll find all of a sudden that you're very wobbly. What you've done is you removed input from the colostrum for motor control. Now, in green here, these two clusters are called the putamen and globus pallidus. We'll talk about them on the next slide. Now, the caudate nucleus, I got a little guy here who's walking and he's got his legs and arms swinging. The caudate nucleus controls that rhythmic swinging of your arms and legs when you're walking so that you maintain balance and don't fall. Okay? This is why they have field sobriety tests where they make you walk a line heel to toe, because being able to properly balance arms and legs and maintain balance is an important part, and it's regulated by these deep cerebral nuclei, and alcohol crosses the blood-brain barrier and can affect them and affect your balance. So let's go on to the next slide. So motor effects of these nuclei. Now, we're going to skip that. Okay, the colostrum. What you see provides feedback through this nucleus in your cerebrum, and then it communicates with other parts of your brain like your motor cortex and things like that to make subtle responses based on what you see, and it's very important. Now, the putamen, globus pallidus, very vague descriptions. One is for muscle movement, involuntary control, and one's for muscle tone or tension. That's not very informative, but that's what they do. Now, the caudate nucleus, the swinging of your arms and legs while you're moving, help you maintain balance. Now, they've found that this particular nucleus in the brain, when they've scanned it, people who have Huntington's disease, which is an autosomal dominant neurological problem where you start to lose control, voluntary control of your muscles, they found that in these people, the caudate nucleus seems to be damaged. Okay, so here's a clinical app. So talking about the caudate nucleus, all right, in Huntington's disease, it produces chorea when these neurons in this nucleus are destroyed. And so what happens is they develop uncontrolled, jerky movements instead of nice, fluid, and smooth movements. They don't have that kind of control. We talked about Parkinson's in the last chapter, so we'll move on. Okay, so we've talked about the cerebrum and movement. Let's talk about the cerebrum and emotions, the limbic system. So don't worry about the Pepys circuit, just worry about the nuclei that I'm going to cover. So the amygdala is one of those deep cerebral nuclei, and they found that this seems to be associated with perceptions or feelings of aggression, fear, because when they showed people who are in a PET scanner, and we'll cover that shortly, it shows the metabolically active areas of a awake person. And when they showed them images on a screen that would evoke terror, fear, aggression, this part of the brain lit up, indicating that it was active in those emotions. Next, the cingulate gyrus. That is for forming associations between what you do and what reaction you get. Okay, so when you're a kid, if you did something that was good, all right, your parents praised you, good job, right? And you learn, oh, that's good, I'm going to do more of that. Or it could be something like you do something like you eat something that's tasty, right? And you, oh, that tastes great, I want to eat that again. Okay, so what you do and the outcome, and if it's a good outcome, it's reinforced to do that again. However, if you were a kid and you did something bad and you got yelled at, oh God, that's terrible, I never want to do that again. Or you eat something maybe that tastes terrible, you are the strength to do that again is limited. You'll not want to do that again. Now, similar, but really for one behavior solely, the septal nuclei, just below the corpus callosum, that thing that connects the hemispheres of your brain. If you do something that produces a pleasurable feeling, it will strengthen that behavior. You'll be inclined to do it again and again and again. And this probably involves a dopamine release, because dopamine is a neurotransmitter that when you do something that's pleasurable, you get a dopamine release and you're inclined to do that again and again and again. Okay. In the diencephalon, there's lots of things, but I just covered the hypothalamus, and that has the four F's. So these are impulses that are unconscious and very hard to control. These are your primal impulses. So one of them is feeding. Food, when you're hungry, it's the only thing you can think about is to find food. Now, if you're in danger, you have what's called the fight flight response. And so this is literally the fight part of that. And then with the fight flight, the fear or running away is also life protecting. And then lastly, reproduction. Now, I put fornicating, not the other F word, but reproduction is also a very strong impulse. So that's the four F's. The thalamus is a relay station. So I think of it as a post office where information is coming in and it's being sorted to where it has to go. And if information is going out, it is also sorted to where it needs to go. And that's what the thalamus does. We'll talk about that at the end of this chapter. Okay, this is a great place to stop for the first part of this lecture. There will be 2 additional lectures, but this is where this one will end. Okay, so I hope you learned about the cerebrum.